Let's cut to the chase. It's Egypt.
A Jewish priestess in a temple. This is absolutely amazing when you think about it.
What is so special about it?
Is different from what we would expect from the Bible. They had other gods.
Dr. Gad Barnea, welcome to Kedem.
It's my pleasure to be here.
And a few months ago, I remember we were filming another episode in this beautiful Hecht Museum in Haifa University. And you told us that you have some special finding that at that time you could not talk about. And Dr. Barnea, I'm sitting at my home, I'm opening National Geographic, and I see this Indiana Jones story. And you're the protagonist in this story, and of course you're bringing this new exciting finding of ostracon from Egypt. What is all this story about?
Well, this particular ostracon was first published in 1926, actually, so I'm not publishing, it's not the first publication. But I did touch upon this ostracon when I was working on my PhD, and I noticed that it is different, it's unexpected, because the text has a certain character, a certain poetic character to it, that needed further investigation. So I put it aside for while I was working on my PhD, and I just told myself I will return to dealing with this particular document later on. Then I arranged to go to Egypt, and I tracked down the whereabouts of this ostracon, and was able to study the text. And what is special about it, the reason that I spent so much effort and time on this, is that this particular ostracon, it's a very short, very small, relatively small shard of a jar, 4 lines of text. It has the first witness that we have, direct witness, of a female priestess officiating in a Jewish temple. It's not only the first, but it's really the only direct witness that we have of any Jewish ritual.
But Dr. Barnea, before we deep dive into this specific text, in general, it's Egypt, and we have a Jewish community in Egypt. What period of time? What is this all about? How the Yhwistic community temple is in Egypt?
Okay, so before I got into that, you use the term Yahwistic, which is the preferred term scientifically speaking, because these are people who worship Yahweh. I use the term Jewish just to make it simple. It's scientifically incorrect. It's anachronistic to use the word Jewish, but it is early Jewish. I mean, it is a snapshot of what will become Judaism or closer to what we know later on. So I will use the word Jewish just to make it simple.
Before we go to talk about this specific community, could we go one level up and speak about the geopolitics of the region at that time, and what time we are talking about also?
Sure, that's of course a great point, thank you. So we're talking about mid-6th century BCE to about 399 BCE. So we're talking about 150 years, give or take, where this Jewish community settled and lived and thrived for a while on this island in Upper Egypt. So this is an island facing today's city of Aswan, in the first cataract of the Nile. And so they came there to the Aswan area around 550 BCE, 540, 550 BCE, somewhere like that. According to my research, there are different views on this, but this is what I published recently as my research shows that they came around that time, and they came as mercenaries to protect that southern border of the Egyptian empire. This was still before the conquest of the Persian conquest of the Egyptian of Egypt. So they came right before the Persian conquest. The Persian conquest was made by Cambyses, King Cambyses, the son of King Cyrus, who everyone knows, Cyrus the Great. And so he conquered Egypt, a very famous conquest. very well documented, part of it mythical, part of it more historical, but there's a lot of documentation on that conquest. And so the regime, of course, changed from the Scythe Egyptian monarchs to the Persian administration. So I should say, of course, that this Jewish community had a fully functional temple on the island of Elephantine. When I say it's fully functional, it had priests, it had sacrifices, it was fairly sumptuous, it was a fairly rich temple with cedar wood ceiling and bronze entryways into the temple. I mean, it was a lot. There was a lot of investment that went into this temple. This was a temple that was not just a sanctuary. It was not just a shrine. It was an actual, relatively large temple. And so they built that according to their own documents. They talk about this. They write about this to Jerusalem. Much later on, they write these letters around 407 BCE, the letters that we have today. And they claim, and there's no reason to doubt their claim, that the temple was already built before the conquest of Cambyses. Okay. So that's the early days of this community. Practically all of the time of their settlement on the island was under Persian rule, except for maybe the last 4 years. Where the Egyptians revolted against the Achaemenid rule and eventually chased them out of Egypt. The Egyptians were able to regain control for a short while over Egypt, and then around 399 we have the last dated document that we have from Elephantine. So we're talking, as I said, about 150 years of settlement on the island. Which is fairly well documented throughout. The first actually dated document that we have is from 495 BCE, and as I said, the last one is from 399, around 399 BCE. So the period is fairly well documented, and it is very variegated. We have a lot of different types of documents. We have ostracon. We're going to talk about ostracon. But we have these smaller documents that are written on clay, on shards of clay. We have papyri, we have official letters, we have personal letters, we have all types of contracts. We have even requests to buy vegetables and things like that. So we have really an amazing snapshot of early Jewish daily life. Okay. Which is something we don't have almost from any other ancient period. This richness documented in one place. So this is an amazing source that still needs to be studied even more. Even though the first excavations were in 1902, we still have a lot of work to do.
How do we know what deity actually was worshipped in this temple?
So it's called the Temple of Yahweh, of Yahah or Yahu. It's never spelled with the tetragram as we are more accustomed to seeing, but it is that the deity, the Jewish deity, if you will. So it's called the house of Beit Yahah or Beit Yahu, and so we know that it is, in that sense, it is Jewish. It is Jewish, but it is early. We're talking about early Judaism. And it is different from what we would expect from the Bible. The Bible presents more of an ideal version of Judaism, and we also see in the Bible that the prophets go against what the people actually believed and observed in their daily life. And here we actually see it. We actually have an actual, as I said, snapshot of the reality of Jews, not just in Egypt. They were not some esoteric community.
Could you describe what is this reality?
So they had the head of their pantheon was Yahweh. Okay, when I say head of the pantheon, this is not a time period where we can talk about monotheism. We are far from, we're not yet there at the point where we can talk about monotheism. And so they had, but their main ethnic deity was Yahweh. This is expressed in the Temple of Yahweh. This is expressed in oaths that they take in Yahweh's name, but not only. There are other deities as well that they take oaths using their name, but also in their personal names. So their names have this divine element in the theophoric name, which is Yahweh. So a lot of these names are Yhwistic, as you said, names that are based on the deity Yahweh. So that is what makes them Jewish, if you will, at the time, where we don't see any kind of halacha or any knowledge of the Bible at all, and clearly no knowledge of any kind of commandments or laws, even no knowledge of the Ten Commandments. They had other gods, for example. So it is a fascinating and truly unique witness of actual daily Jewish life in the Persian or Achaemenid period.
So if we are talking about this specific community, which is sitting in Egypt, what we can tell about this community? How they were engaged with people in Jerusalem, for example, or in other places? Did they feel like belonging to the greater nation? What we can imagine of these people?
So we know that they were in touch with Jerusalem. They knew. So we have two drafts of letters that they wrote to Jerusalem that were addressed to the governor of Jerusalem and to the high priest. By the way, to both the governor of not Jerusalem but of Yahud, the province of Yahud. So both they addressed both the governor of Yahud and the governor of Samaria at the time, and the high priest of Jerusalem. So they were very well connected, very knowledgeable about the state of affairs in Yahud and Samaria at the time. And they receive letters back from them, answers to their questions from Samaria and Yahud. So that is already also an extremely important witness regarding the relationships between these two provinces and the diaspora in Egypt. So this shows that there was very, very close contact. And again, it's important to stress this is not some esoteric community, but it does represent early Judaism at the time. There was, of course, another diaspora in Babylonia at the time. We don't have, of course, any proof of contact between the two, but there are some elements that are similar between both of these communities, including their syncretistic, more pluriform worship patterns, if you will. So, for example, from Babylonia, we have a wedding contract where of Yahwists, of believers in Yahweh, where at the end of the wedding contract, the oath that is taken in the name of the local Babylonian triad of deities. So of Nabu, of Marduk, Nabu, and Zalpinto. So we see this type of and these are in Babylonia. These are Yahwists with Yahweh in their name. So we see the same type of characteristics throughout the Jewish diaspora, be it in the provinces of Yahud and Samaria, or in Babylonia, or in Egypt. There seems to have been a fairly uniform, fairly standardized evolutionary process, if you will, in the Jewish communities at the time.
It seems a bit odd to us because we know this biblical text. It seems like existed ever since it was given by Moses to God to Moses and to the people of Israel. 10 commandments, which you mentioned.
Right.
And according to what you are saying, it seems like this text, which we are quite familiar with right now, was not present in front of this community, and maybe in front of community even in Babylon,
That's
what
right.
you mentioned.
That's right. Actually, we have, before the Hasmonean period, we have zero indication anywhere. Again, be it in the two provinces, Yehud and Samaria, be it in Babylonia or in Egypt. And by the way, in Egypt we have also records, not just at Elephantine, most of them are at Elephantine, but we have Jewish records elsewhere as well. We have zero indications of any knowledge of the Bible. This is absolutely amazing when you think about it, but not only in the 5th century, but also if we go to the 4th century. For example, an important finding that was made in Samaria, if you will, is the Wadi Dalia papyri. In the Wadi Dalia papyri, one of them records a transaction of a Jewish slave owner selling a slave to another Jew. Of course, this goes directly against the commandments from the Torah. And so we can of course excuse every one of these situations independently. We can say, well, maybe they knew about it, but they didn't follow it. But again, the fact remains that there is no counter case. There is no case where we can say, wow, this actually shows actual knowledge of the Torah, that people are actually following it or know about it in any way. For example, there are no idiomatic expressions that we would expect. As I mentioned, I mentioned the temple at Elephantine. That temple was destroyed by the Egyptians in collaboration with the Persian rulers, local Persian rulers, in 410 BCE. After this, they write to Jerusalem explaining what happened and asking for help in rebuilding the temple. Now, these are persecuted Jews in Egypt writing to Jerusalem, not a hint of knowledge of the story of Moses or anything like that in these letters. So again, we can excuse every case and we can start finding all kinds of reasons why it might have been that way, but there is not a single counter case that shows anything about any kind of actual knowledge of the Bible. They had things like the Sabbath, for example, which they call Shabbat with a hey at the end. But the Sabbath, of course, as a notion, originally or earlier meant simply the full moon. And it's that in the Bible in certain places where you have from month to month and from Sabbath to Sabbath. This new month means the new moon, and the Sabbath means the full moon. And so we don't know when we see that in the record at Elephantine. We don't know if they are talking about the full moon or a day of rest. And we do know that on these days that they designate as Sabbath, they did business. So clearly there wasn't a day of rest observed on that day. So there's so much to look and to analyze. Even when you analyze these dates, you need to analyze these dates very carefully with all kinds of mathematical equations and allocations for deviation. And so people have done these many great scholars have done these research, and we still have not one piece of evidence that shows that they knew something about the biblical text. Now, it does not mean that some of the biblical text certainly existed somewhere, probably in Jerusalem, maybe even in Samaria, on Mount Gerizim. There was in some archive. Some of these texts that we find today in the Bible are clearly more ancient, even predating the 5th century BCE. We don't know which ones necessarily, because we don't have an external source that could confirm that. But clearly, they were not known by the general public. They were not known. They were certainly not observed. People did not live according to the stipulations of the Torah or anything in the Bible that we know, and that is an absolutely fascinating fact of their life.
So, from this corpus of letters, of documents, what we can learn about their way of thinking, about their, I would say, theology.
Theology, of course, is a big word for that time period in Jewish circles, but we are, what we can tell, of course, Yahweh is the main the head of the pantheon, the main ethnic deity that they worship. It was the deity that they were most identified with, and it is reflected, as I said, in their own proper names. So their names included that divine element very uniformly, although in some cases you see a person, a Yahwist, a person with Yahweh in their name, giving an Egyptian name to their son, and vice versa. We see these cases. I think the most interesting document that shows something about their theology, if you will, is a contribution document from their last years on the island, that was written probably at the point where the administration shifted from the Persians back to the Egyptians. It is a lengthy papyrus with many names on it. It begins with, this is the list of contributions that were made on this day to the God Yahweh. And then it gives names of people, representatives of families who gave two shekels, if you will, or contributed to Yahweh. But at the end, we find a summary of these contributions. And it says these are the sums of money that were handed, I'm paraphrasing in my head, on this day to Yedunya, who was the leader of the community at the time, so-and-so to Yahweh, and then to Anat Betel and to Eshem Betel. And so I don't remember the exact amounts, but Yahweh and Eshem Betel receive almost the same amount of contributions from the community. Now, the document begins with just Yahweh, but it ends with this triad. We already mentioned the triad in Babylonia, and triads actually have a very lengthy history in Yahwistic circles or Jewish circles before and after Elephantine as well. And when I say triad, I mean that three deities that usually have a kind of a family profile to them. It's not a trinity like in Christianity, because these are not one and three at the same time, but this is three deities that are usually have a kind of a family type relationship between them. And we see, as I said, we see it both in Babylonia and at Elephantine, and it's important to underline. Elephantine was a major cultic center in Egypt thousands of years before the Jews came in. So the island of Elephantine is on the first cataract of the Nile. And in the Egyptian worldview, that is where the waters of the annual inundation of the Nile come from. According to their view, there were two caverns beneath the island, and when the time comes for the annual inundation, the waters flow and inundate the entire Nile Valley. And so this was a major cultic center. The deities, Satet was the main deity there early on, and then Khnum became the major deity there, and then Anuket became another deity. So we have this father, mother, and daughter type of, again, triad. And it looks like what the Jews did was to reflect both the local triad. By the way, it's very interesting because at that time, 404 BCE, Artaxerxes II, the king of the Achaemenid Empire, was the first to actually promulgate a triad in the Achaemenid Empire at the time this papyrus was written. So it is very possible that this papyrus reflects both the local triad, the Egyptian triad, and the now newly promulgated official imperial triad of Artaxerxes II. And which as I said, corresponds to the date of this document very, very well. What we see here is the dialogue that is constantly happening between the Yahwists, these believers in Yahweh, and their environment. So the Egyptians, We have oaths in the name of this goddess Satet, much earlier among the Jews of Elephantine. They take their oaths in the name of Satet. And then we have this triad. So there's always dialogue, and I find it absolutely beautiful how people absorb, they reflect, analyze, and make it their own in certain ways. And so, yeah, we find in a community that is very active, very intelligent in the way they absorb and react to cultic innovations, and in their dialogue with their neighbors and with the empire, of course.
What could you tell about the relations between this community and its neighbors, the Egyptians? Were the Egyptians tolerant for the different beliefs, different gods?
That's an excellent question. In general, not just there, but in the ancient world, there was the idea at that time was that you call a certain deity by a certain name, we call it by a different name, but we're talking about the same deity. So in general, religious tolerance in the ancient world was very good. There were wars for other reasons, but not really on religious grounds. That changed later on, but in the ancient world, it's interesting because even in the letter of pseudo Aristeas, which is 2nd century BCE, I'm not going to get into the details of this letter now, but it is a letter that is well known, written in Jewish circles, 2nd century BCE, and even there, the author supposedly writes to the king, to the Ptolemaic king, and says, well, this deity that you call Zeus, we call Yahweh. I mean, we're talking about 2nd century already, with knowledge of the Torah. So this is after the Torah was already written down, was already authoritative, and a Jew is writing, it says, well, what you call Zeus, we call Yahweh. In fact, even in the New Testament, we have with Paul, when he talks to the Athenians, he says, well, this God that you are calling the unknown God, this is the one that I've come into to proclaim unto you. So even in the 1st century CE, we still have this idea that a deity can be the same, but be called in different names, which means that it was much easier to be tolerant, because we're really talking about the same deity, just a different name for this deity. Now, zooming back into Elephantine and the relations there, so obviously the relations on a cultic level were good throughout the time period of their stay on the island. I mentioned that their temple was destroyed by the Egyptians. But according to my analysis and a number of scholars, early on the scholars thought that this was related to tensions, cultic tensions between the Egyptians and the Jews. But now there is more and more of us scholars, and I think it's starting to become a consensus that the destruction was simply part of the revolt against the empire. The Jewish colony at Elephantine was seen as part of the Persian administration, rightly so. They were very close to the Persian administration, and so the hostilities against them were driven more by the rebellion against the Persian Empire than by anything else. So it was not based on and as I said, the Jews also gave Egyptian names to their sons, or people with Egyptian names gave Yahwistic names to their offspring. We have a case of a woman, Tamet, who was a servant in a Jewish family, and then became a servant of Yahweh later on. So we have all of a very rich set of cases that show a lot of interchanging of ideas, a lot of dialogue, and a lot of tolerance, really, in terms of cultic ideas. And so now it's very interesting also to note, and very important to note, that the Yao temple on the island of Elephantine was, and as I said, I was there, so I could see how close it was to the Chnum temple. It is about maybe 1.5 meters away, or it's a very narrow alleyway that separates the Yahweh temple from the Chnum complex, not just the temple, but an entire complex, as I said. So they literally were side by side. Now, when you think about this, this was, as I said, one of the major cultic centers in Egypt, in all of Egypt. It had implications on the economy of Egypt. The sacrifices that were offered there had implications on the inundation of the Nile. It was important. Somehow, prime real estate right next to the Chnum temple was given to the Jewish community, and only to them. That was the only foreign temple that was allowed to be built on the island. On the other side of the Nile, in Aswan, there were other temples for Arameans, Babylonians, etc. But on the island, somehow, and we don't know why, we can speculate, but we don't know why, prime real estate on the island was given to that Jewish community to build a temple there. And that's one of the mysteries, really, of how this was done. Clearly, there were very good relations between the Jewish community who came early on to Elephantine and the site Egyptian imperial powers at the time. That is clear, otherwise it could not have happened. And again, as I said, it was a sumptuous temple, a rich temple with cedar wood. I mean, cedar wood you have to bring from Phoenicia at the time, and so this is a rich and very well appointed temple. Now, another word on the Jewish community there, which was not a small community. According to our estimates, about 3,000 to 5,000 Jews only, and of course there were others. It was very cosmopolitan. But in terms of the Jews, there are about 3,000 to 5,000 people on the island at the time, which is roughly the same amount, according to certain estimates by archaeologists, of the people who were the Jews in Jerusalem at the time. So after the exile. So we're talking about a large community with a large temple with priests that are officiating and offering sacrifices. These sacrifices are not the full set of offerings that we know from the Bible, but it is a subset of these. So we have a mincha, an offering, and a gift offering, and we have a holocaust and olah, things like that. But we don't. But it's not a full set that we know from the biblical sources.
Let's cut to the chase and talk about the finding which you are so excited about, and you published in National Geographic, the ostracon, with the reading of the text which you proposed. What is so special about it?
So just maybe a side note on that. The article, the scientific article was published in Religions, and someone in National Geographic published about this scientific article. The scientific article is in open access, so anyone interested can read it freely online.
We will put a link to this article below the movie.
Great. So, and it has all of the information. What made me interested in this is that I noticed that it had the first indication that it was special, or maybe before this, I would say that since 1926 to about a month ago, this ostracon was classified as instructions regarding a tunic. So just a simple administrative text, if you will, on a tunic that was left in the temple. So it clearly says temple, so we know it had something to do with the temple, and it was pretty much ignored by scholarship, except when people wanted to show another ostracon that talks about the temple, but it was seen as a simple text relating to a tunic that was left at the temple. When I studied it, I noticed that it was written in simple poetic features, but still very clear poetic features. It had a certain meter to it. It had a chiastic form to it, and it had other poetic features as well that we find in the Psalms, for example. So it would be highly strange that just a note saying that I deposited a tunic on the temple would be written in a poetic manner. So that was my first indication that there might be something more to this. And then I started looking at this as from the perspective of the curses that we know from the Greco-Roman world. Now, what my predecessors did not, or the first people who published the, as I said, 1926, and even later on, did not have that I do have today, standing on the shoulders of giants, is that we have great scholarship from the past 20, 30 years only on the curses against thieves in the Greco-Roman world. So we have a genre, an entire genre that we can compare this to. And then I started looking at the comparables and looking at these curse texts, and I saw that it actually fits the genre amazingly well. It is the oldest text that reflects this genre, and the only one that we have in Aramaic. Again, as I said, we have many curse texts like this from the Greco-Roman world. And they span the entire Roman Empire. We have them, of course, in our area, we have them in Greece, and we have them all the way to Bath in England or in Spain. We have a lot of these texts, so we can compare it to, we have a very large data set to compare this text to. And it fits that genre very well. It is done in a temple, it is done by a priestess, which is usually the case. The deity is being commanded to consecrate the stolen item, or something like the stolen item, or an identical item to what was stolen, to himself or herself. Often it's a female deity, and so the name of the person that was sponsoring the curse, from whom the item was stolen, is mentioned also in the on the text. So we have all of these features on this ostracon, and this is by far the earliest example of this genre of curses that we have. And as I said, it's the only one that we have in Aramaic, the only one that we have in a Jewish context, okay, and the only one where that's not just in the Jewish context, but in the Jewish temple. Now, what's arguably the most thrilling element here is the fact that it is clearly officiated by a priestess. Now the text, I'll just paraphrase it in my head in English, but the text basically says, "Behold my tunic that I deposited in the house of Yahweh." So you see that poetic element here. In the house, comma, the house of Yahweh. Command the lion, and I'll get back to the lion here, but command to the lion or to Uriah, there are different ways to read this, and let him consecrate it. And then signed with the name of a woman that we know from Elephantine, that's a common name there, Salua, that's the name of this woman. Now, this lion versus Uriah element, the image of Yahweh in the Persian period was often that of a lion. We see it in the Bible, but we also see it in archaeological finds from that period. We see jar handles that have a lion with a sun disk, meaning a divine lion in the province of Yahud. So we are talking about a Jewish context where they represented the deity as a lion with a sun disk. So the fact that Yahweh was likened to a lion at the time cannot be disputed. And I believe that that's what's going on here. This priestess is commanding the lion to consecrate this tunic that was brought to the temple. But it could be Uriah. We know that there was a priest or someone related to the temple by the name of Uriah, and it's a name that is fairly common at Elephantine. And that also fits the genre. The genre can be either commanding a deity or commanding another priest. Both of these things fit the genre of curses against thieves. Now, the way it worked, that's important to explain to a modern audience, is that when something was stolen from you, Of course, you also want it back, but the main thing that you want is for the thief to be punished. And what they did, and it was very, as I said, very popular at the time, what they did is they would bring to the temple something like a copy of the same, or something like that which was stolen from them, and they would ask the deity to make it now their own business and consider the thief as a temple robber, so that the thief would be cursed by the deity for their actions. And again, this idea of bringing something like that, what was stolen from me, to the deity so that the deity can now pursue the thief, was very, very popular. We see it in the Bible, something very similar, with the story of Micaiah or Micah in the book of Judges, at the end of the book of Judges, where his mother sees some silver that was stolen from her, and she consecrates the silver, same amount of silver that was stolen from her, to the deity. So this idea is also found in the Bible, and it is found, therefore, in a cultic context that is the same as the same Jewish cultic context as we find at Elephantine.
Dr. Barnea, it's clear that from this finding we can have a lot of implications on the science. But if you have to take one major takeaway from this finding, what it would be?
Well, for me, it's clear that the main interest in this ostracon and the main feature of it is the fact that this is a direct witness of the role of a priestess, of a woman commanding the deity, which is my preferred interpretation, or another priest. But in any case, she is the one responsible. Whether it's commanding the deity or another priest, she's the one responsible for a ritual that was observed in a Jewish temple. So we have a Jewish priestess in a temple being at the highest authority for a certain ritual that was practiced there. And since, as I said before, there is no reason to believe that the Elephantine community was different from other Jewish communities. This was probably the case in other Jewish temples at the time, possibly even in Jerusalem or on Mount Gerizim. And we probably also had other Jewish temples in Egypt at the time. I won't get into that now, but so this was probably the case that we had female priestesses which had great authority in Jewish temples at the time. At some point, that stopped being the case, but we don't know exactly when. We can't date it. Again, it's interesting because we have only one witness. So because we have nothing to compare it to, we can't know when it stopped. But this is the only direct witness that we have of a priestess, and again, the only direct witness that we have of any liturgy or any cultic observance that occurs in a Jewish temple anywhere. Okay, so it is immensely important on all of these fronts.
Dr. Barnea, what a journey you have taken us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
And guys, like, subscribe, share, and stay tuned for more on Kedem channel. Thank you again.